I've never been one to get into trouble. Ironically, I chose to be a police officer precisely because I believe in order, justice, and peace. 13 years on the force taught me a lot about human nature, about how people can lose their tempers for reasons that seem insignificant to outsiders. That Saturday, however, I wasn't on duty. I wasn't carrying my badge or my gun. I was just the bride's sister, Monica, trying to make sure the happiest day of Beatrice's life went smoothly. The wedding took place on a rural property near Portland, one of those picturesque places where you'll be charged a fortune for a wedding amidst vineyards and mountains. Beatrice had always dreamed of something like this. Since she was little, she'd cut out photos from magazines, imagining her big day. I never cared much for such things. Maybe that's why I was still single at 35. The ceremony was beautiful. Beatrice was radiant in that lace dress our mother helped her choose. Conil, the groom, seemed like a decent guy, a business administrator from a traditional Boston family with a calm demeanor that thinks before speaking. They met in college and dated for 5 years. Everything was perfect, just as Beatrice always wanted. The problem started at reception. "Helena, you look stunning," my mother said, adjusting the neckline of my navy blue dress. It was simple but elegant. I'd never felt completely comfortable in dresses. "Thanks, Mom. But today is Baya's day. She really is amazing." "You both look beautiful," she replied with that look I knew well. When will it be your turn?" "Look." I chose to ignore it. The room was decorated with white and blue flower arrangements. Round tables were scattered throughout the space, each with a small sign indicating where each guest should sit. In the center, a still empty dance floor, and in the corner, a bar where 2 bartenders efficiently served drinks. That's where I headed after the ceremony. I needed a glass of champagne. "A dose of liquid courage?" asked a voice beside me. I turned around and found myself face to face with Marcos, Daniel's childhood friend. We'd met at the rehearsal dinner the night before. "He was the best man." "Something like that," I replied, raising my glass. I'm not much of a fan of crowds. "Curious, for someone who deals with the public on a daily basis," he commented, ordering a bourbon from the bartender. "It's different at work. I'm in control." Marcos smiled. He was an attractive man, there was no denying it. Tall, with a well-groomed athletic body and neatly trimmed dark hair. The kind of guy who knows he's good-looking and takes advantage of it. "And what's it like being a police officer in Portland?" "I imagine it's not easy," I shrugged. "It has its challenges, but I enjoy what I do." I must admit I was surprised when Daniel told me. "It's not exactly what you'd expect from the bride's sister." "And what is expected of the bride's sister?" He took a sip of his drink before answering, "I don't know, teacher? Nurse? Something else, female?" I added, arching an eyebrow. "That's not what I meant." But his smile said otherwise. At that moment Beatrice approached, beaming. "Helena, the photographer is looking for you. Let's take the family photos." I nodded, setting my glass on the It was interesting talking to you, Marcos. "My pleasure, officer," he replied with a wink. The photos took longer than I would have liked. Forced smiles, awkward poses, and contradictory orders from the photographer. By the time we were finally finished, dinner was already being served. I was assigned to the head table, along with my parents, the bride and groom, and the main groomsmen, including Marcos. On my other side was Carlo, Daniel's cousin from Italy. His English was limited and my Italian was non-existent, so our attempts at conversation were brief and awkward. It was during dessert that I noticed the first signs of trouble. At the next table was Jason, a college friend of Daniel's. He'd been drinking steadily since the reception began. Now his voice was too loud, his gestures exaggerated. "Trouble ahead," I muttered to myself. "What?" asked Mark. I pointed out discreetly. "That guy is about to become a nuisance." Marcos looked in the indicated direction and shrugged. "It's just Jason. He always gets like that after a few drinks. Harmless." I shook my head. I'm experienced enough to recognize when someone's about to cause trouble. And I don't. "Want anything to ruin my sister's day? Always on duty, right?" Marcos smiled ironically. "Relax, officer. Today you're just a guest." I ignored the comment and continued watching. Jason was now chatting animatedly with one of the bridesmaids, Camila, Beatrice's friend since college. Judging by her uncomfortable look, the conversation wasn't welcome. I was about to stand up when the newlyweds were called for their first dance. The lights dimmed, and Beatrice and Daniel walked to the center of the dance floor to the sound of "Can't Help Falling in Love." I smiled to see my sister so happy, her eyes fixed on her husband's as if nothing else existed. After a few songs, the DJ announced it was time for the speech. As the bride's sister, I would be first. I stood up, adjusted my dress, and grabbed the microphone. Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Helena, Beatrice's sister. I paused, feeling nervous. Speaking in front of crowds was never my strong point. When we were kids, Bea used to play wedding dress up with her dolls. She always forced me to be the groom because none of the dolls were worthy of marrying. The main doll. Soft laughter rippled through the room. Beatrice covered her face, feigning embarrassment. Since she was little, my sister knew exactly what she wanted. And today, seeing her here with Daniel, I realized she's found someone who truly deserves her. Someone who looks at her as if she were the only person in the world. I raised my glass. To you both, I wish you a life filled with love, respect, and understanding. May you build a story together as beautiful as today. Cheers! The guests applauded as I returned to my seat, relieved to be finished. Marcos was next. His speech was filled with inside jokes and college stories, some bordering on inappropriate. I noticed discomfort in Beatrice's eyes at times, but she maintained her diplomatic smile. After the speeches, the band started playing again, and the dance floor quickly filled up. I took the opportunity to step away for a moment, seeking a quiet moment on the outdoor terrace. The cool night air was welcome. I leaned against the railing, admiring the garden lights and taking a deep breath. Inside, music throbbed. Bevo Tum, some Latin hit that was blasting on the radio. Skipping the party, I turned. It was Jason, Daniel's drunk friend. He staggered toward me, a half-empty glass in his hand. I just needed some air, I replied, tensing instinctively. Years of police work had made me alert to drunk and unpredictable people. You're Beatrice's sister, right? The police officer? He leaned in too close, his breath thick with alcohol. That's right. Did you know that police officers have one of the highest divorce rates? Something like 70%. I'm not interested in statistics right now, Jason. Why don't you go back inside? The party's good. He took a step back, raising his hands in exaggerated surrender. Sorry, just trying to make conversation. You're very pretty. You know that? I rolled my eyes. Thank you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I tried to walk past him, but Jason blocked my path. Come on, I'm just being... What's the rush? Jason, you've had too much to drink. Go back inside, have a glass of water, and try not to ruin my sister's wedding, okay? Her face changed, the smile giving way to an irritated expression. Typical. You're all the same. You think you're superior. At that moment, Marcos appeared on the terrace. Everything okay here? Everything's great, I replied dryly. Jason was already leaving. Marcos put his hand on his friend's shoulder. Come on, man. There's a bottle of tequila waiting for us at the bar. Jason hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and followed Marcos inside. Before entering, Marcos glanced at me over his shoulder. You owe me one, officer. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising irritation. Who did he think he was? As if I needed rescuing, I returned inside a few minutes later. The party was in full swing, the dance floor packed. I spotted my parents dancing, my father with those awkward steps that always made me smile. Across the room, Beatrice chatted animatedly with some friends. She seemed so happy, so fulfilled. I felt a pang of what? Envy? No, it wasn't that. It was more a sense that our lives had taken completely different paths. While she was raising her family, I was chasing criminals through the streets of Portland. I approached the bar again, determined to get a water. I needed to keep my head clear. A water, please, I asked the bartender. Sure you don't want something stronger? It was Marcos again, appearing beside me like a persistent shadow. I am sure. He ordered another bourbon. I managed to convince Jason to calm down. He's dancing with one of Daniel's cousins right now. Excellent. You know, you could be a little more grateful. I turned to face him. Thankful for what, exactly? For interfering in a situation I had perfectly under control. Marcos laughed, a sound that irritated me deeply. Under control? The guy is almost twice your size. I face guys bigger than him every day, Marcos. It's part of my job, sure. But you're not working today, are you? You don't have your badge, your gun, or your colleagues to cover you. I took a sip of water, trying to remain calm. You have no idea what I am or am not capable of doing. He leaned in, invading my personal space. I think I know exactly what you're capable of. Women like you are all the same, trying to prove they're tough, that they can do everything men can. Women like me? I repeated, feeling my blood boil. Yes, all of you with your positions of power, your badges, and your attitude. Deep down, you're just compensating for something. I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head. I think this conversation is over. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to make me stop. Not done talking yet, he said, his voice lower now. Take your hand off my arm. Each word came out slowly and deliberately. For a moment, I thought he was going to disobey. Then, slowly, he let go. You need to learn to relax, Helena. The party has just started. I walked away without answering, my heart pounding. Not from fear, but from anger. Who the hell did he think he was? I found Beatrice near the dessert table. She noticed my expression immediately. What happened? Nothing, I replied automatically. I'm just a little tired. She didn't look convinced. I know that look, Helena. It's the same one you had when we fought over clothes as teenagers. I smiled slightly. It's nothing, Bea. Really. Today is your day. I don't want to ruin it with nonsense. It's Marcos, isn't it? I saw you guys talking at the bar. He can be a jerk sometimes. Sometimes? Beatrice sighed. Okay, often. But he and Daniel have been friends since childhood. They practically grew up together. That doesn't give you the right to be an asshole. Of course not. Just ... Try to ignore him, okay? For me? I nodded, making no promises. Your dress is amazing, you know? Mom nailed it. The topic shifted to wedding details, and soon Beatrice was being called upon by other guests. I was left alone again, observing the celebration around. It was then that I noticed a commotion near the bar. Jason, apparently even more drunk, was arguing heatedly with a man I didn't recognize. Judging by his loose tie and discarded blazer, he was probably another college friend. I headed there quickly, my professional instincts taking over. Before I could get there, however, Marcos was already between them, trying to calm things down. I stopped a few feet away, watching. Jason was gesturing wildly, while the other man seemed more subdued but equally furious. Marcos spoke quietly, a hand on each of their chests, keeping his distance between them. Some guests were already looking on curiously. I didn't want this to escalate and ruin Beatrice's party. I approached, determined to help, regardless of Marcus's irritating presence. Is there a problem here, gentlemen? I asked, using my professional tone. Marcos looked at me, irritated. Everything's under control. You can go back to the party. It doesn't seem under control, I observed calmly. Jason pointed at the other man, his fingers shaking with anger. That jerk was hitting on my girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend, the other corrected. You guys broke up 3 months ago, remember? She can talk to whoever she wants. Everyone, calm down, Marcos intervened. We're at Daniel's wedding. Let's not ruin his day. That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid, I added. Why don't we all go outside and get some air? Talk calmly? Look, I'm going to say this for the last time. Marcos turned to me, clearly irritated. Get out of the way. I'll take care of this. I was surprised by his aggressiveness. I'm just trying to help. We don't need your help. This is a man's business. I felt my face heat up. Excuse me, guy stuff? That's right. So, excuse me. He waved his hand dismissively, as if I were a nosy child. I'm not going anywhere, I stated, stepping forward. I have experience resolving situations like this, and you're clearly not having success. Marcos laughed, a derisive sound that made my blood boil. Experience? You think dealing with drunks in Portland qualifies you for anything? Get out of the way, Helene. No. The two men had stopped arguing and were now watching our interaction curiously. Other guests were beginning to notice that something was wrong. Helena, Marcos said, lowering his voice, you're making a scene. This will ruin your sister's wedding. That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid. Then get out of the way and let me handle this. I don't trust your approach. His face turned red with anger. Stand back, he ordered. Get out of the way. When he took a step toward me, Jason took advantage of the distraction to shove the other man. It was like lighting a match near gasoline. Within seconds, the two were locked in a fistfight, knocking over glasses and bottles from the bar. Marcos tried to separate them and was struck by a stray punch from Jason. I acted on instinct. In one fluid motion, I grabbed Jason's arm and twisted it behind my back, pinning him against the bar. "Calm down, now," I ordered in a firm voice. Jason struggled then gave in, gasping for breath. The other man was being restrained by two guests. "Let me go," Jason grumbled. "I didn't do anything. I'll let you go when I'm sure you won't cause any more trouble. Understood?" He nodded reluctantly. I released him slowly, ready to react if he tried anything. Jason straightened his wrinkled shirt, shooting me a furious look, but kept his distance. Marcos approached, his lip bleeding slightly where the punch had landed. "Satisfied?" he spat. "You got what you wanted. You became the center of attention." Before I could answer, a voice sounded behind us. "What's going on here?" It was Daniel, closely followed by Beatrice. Their faces showed a mixture of confusion and concern. "It's nothing," Marcos said quickly, rubbing his injured lip. "Just a little disagreement. We've already resolved it." "Jason?" Daniel looked at his friend, who seemed unable to look at him. "Sorry, man," Jason muttered. "I think I had too much to drink." Beatrice looked at me, a silent question in her eyes. "It's okay, Baya," I assured. "It was just a misunderstanding, like Marcos said." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded slowly. "The music's about to start again. Why don't we all go back to the party?" The guests began to disperse, the tension gradually easing. Jason was led outside by some friends, presumably for some fresh air. Marcos remained, his eyes fixed on me. "You didn't need to interfere. I had everything under control. It didn't seem like it, because you didn't give me a chance. Do you know what your problem is, Helena? You don't trust anyone? You think you're the only one capable of solving things? And you think you have the right to order me around just because you're a man?" He laughed, a humorless sound. "It has nothing to do with being a man. It has to do with you being nosy." "Nosy?" I was trying to stop a fight at my sister's wedding, and it ended up causing exactly what it wanted to avoid. I took a deep breath, trying to contain my anger. "I'm not going to stand here and argue with you, Marcos. Clearly, we have different views on how to handle situations." "Clearly," he agreed sarcastically. I turned to leave, but stopped when he added, "You're exactly the kind of woman no one wants around at a party. Always thinking you know better, that you can do more. Can't you just relax and be feminine for a day?" I turned slowly, feeling every muscle in my body tense. "What did you say?" "You heard me. Maybe if you acted more like a woman and less like a cop, you wouldn't be alone at 35. It was like something snapped inside me. Before I knew what I was doing, my fist had connected with his nose. Marcos staggered back, more surprised than hurt. Blood began to leak from his left nostril. "Are you crazy?" he yelled, holding his nose. Only then did I realize what I had done. Around us, guests looked on in shock. A few meters away, Beatrice watched the scene in horror. "BIA ... I began, but she had already turned around, disappearing among the guests. Daniel approached, his face a mask of disappointment. "Helena, I think you should go home." "Daniel," he ... double quotes. "I don't care who started what. You just punched my best friend at my wedding. That's not the behavior I expect from the bride's sister." My face burned with embarrassment. I looked around, seeing the critical looks, the whispers. In a corner, my parents watched, confused and embarrassed. "I understand," he said finally. "I'll be leaving. I apologize for the inconvenience." I grabbed my bag from the table and quickly left, avoiding looking at anyone. The cool night air hit me like a slap, bringing me back to the reality of what I had just done. I ruined my sister's wedding. I lost control just like the drunks I criticized. I became the talk of the town for months to come. I walked to the parking lot feeling small and pathetic. Before I reached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. "Helena, wait!" It was Beatrice. Her white dress shimmered under the parking lot lights like a ghost, chasing me. "Bea, I'm sorry," I began, my voice cracking. "I messed up." She stopped in front of me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. For a moment, I thought she was going to scold me, yell at me. Instead, she hugged me. "You didn't ruin anything," he whispered. The party was almost over anyway. I felt tears stream down my face, but everyone saw it. Your in-laws, your friends, ... double quote, so what? She pulled away, gripping my shoulders. Marcos is an idiot. Always has been. Daniel knows it. He just won't admit it because they grew up together. Even so, I shouldn't have lost control. Beatrice sighed. What did he say to you? It must have been pretty bad to make you lose your temper like that. I shook my head. It doesn't matter. They were just stupid words. Words hurt. Believe me, I know. We were silent for a moment. Just the distant sound of music coming from the hall. You should get back to the party, I said finally. Daniel must be looking for you. Daniel's busy. Trying to convince Marcos not to press charges against you, she replied with a half-smile, though I think he's more concerned about his bruised ego than his nose. I couldn't help but smile. I didn't even hit that hard. I saw the blood. It looked like a running tap. Blame it on gravity. And on the alcohol diluting his blood. We laughed together like we used to when we were kids. Look, I'm not going to ask you to come back to the party, Beatrice said after a moment. I know it would be uncomfortable for you, but know that I'm not mad. Are you sure? I caused a scene at your wedding. You caused a scene defending your honor. It's not the same thing. She took my hand. Besides, I bet half the guests are secretly applauding you. Marcos isn't exactly popular. Still, I'm sorry. I know. She gave me another hug. Go home. Get some rest. We'll have breakfast tomorrow before I leave for our honeymoon, okay? I nodded, grateful for the understanding. Beatrice had always been like this, kind, empathetic, willing to see the best in people. We were so different yet so connected. Thank you, Baya. That's what sisters are for. She walked away, straightening her dress. I have to go back now. I promised Daniel a dance before the cake. Go. Be happy. She smiled radiantly and walked back into the room. I watched until her silhouette disappeared into the light. I got in the car and started the engine, the night's events replaying in my mind like a movie. Marcos, Jason, the fight, the punch, it all seems surreal now. Deep down, I knew Marcos had touched on something that bothered me deeply. The loneliness, the feeling that my career had cost me more than I was willing to admit. The fear that maybe he was right. Maybe I was exactly the kind of woman men avoided. I shook my head, pushing those thoughts away. This was no time for self-pity. What had happened had happened. Now was the time to move on. I drove back to my hotel, about 20 minutes from the property. The starry Oregon sky seemed endless above me, oblivious to the small human dramas unfolding below. Arriving in my room, I took off my dress and shoes, feeling immediate relief. I took a hot shower, trying to wash away the tension of the day. As the water ran down my body, I remembered Beatrice's face as she hugged me in the parking lot. There was no anger there, only understanding. Amidst all the confusion, this was the moment I would carry with me, my sister's forgiveness. I stepped out of the shower, wrapped myself in a fluffy hotel robe, and sat on the edge of the bed. My phone was flashing with notifications. Several messages from my worried parents. One from my partner at the police station, asking if I was okay. Apparently, someone had already spread the word. I ignored them all and lay down, physically and emotionally exhausted. Sleep, however, was slow to come. The next morning, I woke to a knock on the door. Still groggy, I got up and answered it. It was Beatrice, already dressed in her traveling clothes, a small suitcase at her side. Good morning, sleeping beauty. She smiled. I brought coffee. May I come in? I nodded, making room. She came in, placing a bag on the table. Cappuccino and croissants. Your favorite breakfast. You're an angel, I murmured, taking one of the glasses. The first sip was revitalizing. What time is it? Almost 10. Our flight to Cancun leaves at 2. I sat on the edge of the bed, still trying to gather my thoughts. What? About Daniel? He's just finishing packing. He said to give you a hug. After yesterday? I doubt it. Beatrice smiled, sitting down next to me. Actually, after you left, Marcos had a few more drinks and started bad-mouthing you to anyone who would listen. It was so nasty that Daniel put him in a taxi and asked him till he left. Even Daniel's parents found his behavior deplorable. I blinked in surprise. Really? Seriously? Apparently, it wasn't the first time Marcos had behaved like this. Daniel's mother mentioned that he always had trouble with women in positions of authority. Beatrice took a bite of her croissant. Besides, the story of how you knocked him out with a single punch became the stuff of legend that night. I couldn't help but smile. Don't exaggerate. It was just a little punch, not according to the witnesses. From what they're saying, You practically did a ninja move and knocked him unconscious. We laughed together, the weight of the previous night gradually lifting. How are you feeling? She asked after a moment. I shrugged, embarrassed, regretful, but also, I don't know, a little relieved. Relieved? Yeah. Like something that was stuck inside me finally found its way out. I took another sip of coffee. Not that I recommend punching someone as therapy. Beatrice smiled understandingly. You know, Helena, you've always been the strong one in the family, ever since you were little. Remember when that boy pushed me on the playground and you, at 8 years old, went over and made him apologize? Kevin Donovan? A little brat. Yeah, you've always had my back. You've always been the tough one. She took my hand. Sometimes I wonder who has your back. I felt a lump in my throat. I don't need protection. Everyone needs it once in a while. We sat in silence for a few minutes, eating our croissants and drinking coffee. The morning light streamed in through the hotel window, creating golden patterns on the carpet. Look, there's one. More thing you should know, Beatrice finally said. Marcos won't press charges. How do you know? Daniel called him this morning. Apparently, after his hangover and a few moments of reflection, he realized he would look very bad on tape if he told the full story. Well, that's a relief. The last thing I need is an assault lawsuit. Exactly. Besides, she smiled mischievously. Daniel discreetly mentioned that you could report him for verbal harassment. I shook my head in amazement. Your husband is smarter than he looks. He has his moments. Beatrice looked at her watch. I have to go. Daniel must be waiting. I stood up with her, feeling a pang of sadness. Have fun in Mexico. Bring me a sombrero. I'll bring two to make up for the drama. She hugged me tightly. Love you, sis. I love you too. I walked her to the door. Before leaving, Beatrice turned around one last time. You know, Helena, what Marcos said about you being alone, it's not true. No? No, you're not. Alone because you chose a career. You're alone because you haven't found someone who's your equal yet. She smiled confidently. And when you do, it'll be spectacular. Someone who admires your strength, not feels threatened by it. With these words, she left, leaving me with thoughts that would stay with me for the next few days. I returned to Portland that afternoon. Routine welcomed me with open arms. Pending reports, calls to return, a new robbery case in the business district. 3 days. After the wedding, I received an unexpected message. It was from Camila, Beatrice's friend, who had been bothered by Jason at the party. Hi, Helena, I hope you're okay. Beatrice gave me your number. I just wanted to thank you for intervening at the wedding. Even before the mess, I noticed how you kept an eye on Jason when he was bothering me. Few people notice that kind of thing. Thanks for being mindful. If you want to grab coffee sometime, I'd love to return the favor. I smiled into the phone. Maybe Beatrice was right. Maybe there were people who admired my strength, not felt threatened by it. I replied, coffee would be great when you're free. A week later, over coffee at a small coffee shop in downtown Portland, Camila told me more about the impact of the wedding. Honestly, you've become something of a heroine among Baya's friends. She laughed. Several of us have endured Marcos at social events over the years. He's always been that guy, handsome, charming at first glance, but completely toxic when crossed. I never imagined that a punch would cause so much commotion. It wasn't just the punch, Camila explained, stirring her latte. It was the symbolism. A woman who wouldn't accept being diminished or controlled. I reflected on this. My whole life had been built around protecting people, doing what was right. At Beatrice's wedding, for a moment, I had protected myself. You know what's funny? I commented. I became a police officer because I wanted to make a difference to protect others. I never thought it would put me in a role where people would see me as intimidating. Intimidating isn't necessarily bad, Camila argued. It means you command respect. Maybe. But sometimes, I wonder if there isn't a price to pay. If Marcos wasn't right about some things, Camila frowned. What things? About being alone. About pushing people away. She set her cup down with a little more force than necessary. Look, I'll be straight with you. I'm a psychologist. I've been working with couples for 8 years, and I can assure you, being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who doesn't value who you are. His words hit me with unexpected force. Besides, she continued more softly, who said you'll be alone forever? Just because you haven't found the right person yet doesn't mean they don't exist. I took a sip of my coffee, thoughtful. I think part of me always wondered if I had to choose my career or a fulfilling personal life. That's a false dichotomy, Camila replied promptly. You can have both. You just need to find someone who understands your path, who respects your commitment to work. That seems rare. It's less common than it should be, she agreed, but not impossible. Our conversations continued over the following weeks. Coffees turned into lunches, lunches into dinners. We discovered common interests: thrillers, hiking, indie music. Camila was smart, funny, and above all, respectful. A month after Beatrice's wedding, I received a postcard from Mexico. On the front, a paradisiacal beach. On the back, my sister's elegant handwriting. I hope you're doing well. Mexico is wonderful. But most importantly, Daniel told me that Marcos finally admitted he was a complete jerk that night. Apparently, after much reflection and some direct conversations with friends, he realized how sexist and inappropriate he was. I don't know if he'll have the courage to apologize to you in person someday, but I thought you might like to know. Sometimes, a well-placed punch can really put things right. Love you, Bea. I smiled, putting the card away in my desk drawer. Some lessons are learned the hard way. That night, as I prepared for another shift at the police station, I reflected on how a single event, a fight at a wedding, had triggered so many changes. Camila in my life, a new respect for myself, maybe even a lesson learned from Marcos. I put on my uniform, tied my hair back, and I adjusted my holster. In the mirror, I saw not just a police officer, but a complete woman in every sense. Strong enough to protect others, strong enough to defend herself, and now, finally, strong enough to allow herself to be vulnerable. The badge gleamed in the light as I pinned it to my chest. It was more than a symbol of authority. It was part of who I was, but it didn't define me completely. I stepped out into the night, ready for whatever it brought: an emergency call, a chance encounter with Camila after her shift, a text from Beatrice, small moments that together formed my life on my own terms. At my sister's wedding, a man tried to pull me from. Move out of the way, he ordered, but I didn't. I never would again. And that, I realized, was the true victory. Bigger than any punch, more meaningful than any confrontation. To be who I was, without apology, to take up my space, without holding back, and to allow myself to dream of possibilities that once seemed distant: companionship, understanding, maybe even love. The bar fight at the wedding was over, but the real story, my story, was just beginning. A few weeks later, I got another text from Beatrice. You know who asked for you? Carlo, Daniel's Italian cousin. Apparently, he was quite impressed with your, how did he say it? Coraggio. He asked for your number. Did I give you permission? I smiled at the phone. Life really does have a peculiar sense of humor. Yes, I replied. You can, after all. Who knows where a new conversation might lead? This time, no misunderstandings, no bar fights, just two people getting to know each other with respect and curiosity. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay, because I've learned the most important lesson of all. My worth doesn't depend on anyone's validation. I'm a police officer. I'm a woman. I'm a sister. I'm a friend. And I'm, above all, true to myself. In the end, perhaps that is what true courage means. The following weeks brought a comforting routine. Work at the station was as intense as ever. Portland was relentless, especially with winter approaching. The days grew shorter and the nights longer, bringing with them the usual spate of petty thefts and break-ins that accompany the season. I hadn't yet responded to Carlos's message. Something told me to take it slow, not to rush into things. Maybe it was just a sense of self-preservation after so many disastrous encounters in recent years. Or maybe it was the fact that my attention was partially occupied by the increasingly frequent conversations with Camila. On a particularly cold Tuesday, while we were drinking hot chocolate at a cafe near the courthouse, Camila mentioned Carlos's message. So, Beatrice told me about Daniel's Italian cousin, she said with a curious smile. Do you plan to answer? I raised my eyebrows. Have you two been talking about my love life behind my back? Not exactly behind your back, she laughed. Let's just say we're rooting for your emotional well-being. How generous, I replied wryly, but I couldn't hide a smile. Actually, I don't know if I'll answer. We barely spoke during the wedding. He was probably just intrigued by the police officer who punched the best man. Or maybe he saw something in you that genuinely interested him, Camila suggested, tilting her head. Carlo doesn't seem like the type to be easily impressed by scandals. On the contrary, Beatrice said he's quite reserved. I took a sip of chocolate. Thoughtful. What would you do? Me? I would answer. What's the worst that could happen? A chemistry-free conversation that ends politely? At least you won't be left wondering what if. She was right, of course. As a psychologist, Camila had an annoying habit of being right about emotional matters. I'll think about it, I promise. That night, when I got home after my shift, I picked up my phone and typed a simple message to the number Beatrice had sent me. Hello, Carlo. It's Helena, Beatrice's sister. She told me you asked for me. How are you? I sent it before I could change my mind and put my phone away, determined not to obsessively check for a response. Surprisingly, the answer came almost immediately. Helena, so good to hear from you. I'm fine, thank you. I returned to Milan a few weeks ago. I wish I could have talked to you more at the wedding, but my English wasn't much help. I'm using a translation app now. Hope it makes sense. I smiled at the phone. There was something charmingly honest about the message. Your English is great, I replied. The app is working well. What's Milan like this time of year? And so began an exchange of messages that would last for the next few days. Carlo was an architect, working in a firm that specialized in the restoration of historic buildings. He was 3 years older than me, divorced, and childless. He enjoyed jazz, Italian neorealist cinema, and had a passion for vintage motorcycles, which he restored on weekends. There was something comforting about talking to someone thousands of miles away. No pressure, no immediate expectations, just two people sharing pieces of their lives through text messages. A week later, he suggested a video call. It would be nice to see your face and practice my spoken English, he wrote. If you're comfortable with that, of course. I accepted, more out of curiosity than anything else. On the appointed evening, I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, my hair still damp from the shower, wearing a comfortable Portland Police Department t-shirt. When his face appeared on the screen, I was struck by how little my memory had done him justice. Carlo had that classic Mediterranean beauty olive skin, expressive dark eyes, black hair with a hint of gray at the temples that gave him a distinguished air. Boon Sarah, he smiled, visibly nervous. It's good to see you, Helena. Likewise, I replied, suddenly aware of my casual appearance. How was your day? The conversation flowed surprisingly well, considering the language barrier. Carlo spoke slowly, occasionally pausing to find the right word, sometimes resorting to Italian expressions that made me laugh. We talked about our professions, Beatrice and Daniel's wedding, and the differences between Portland and Milan. I must admit, he said after about an hour, I was very impressed with you at the wedding. For the punch? I asked, a little embarrassed. He laughed, shaking his head. Not exactly. Well, maybe a little, but it was more your, how do you say, presence? You have a strong, determined energy. It's rare and fascinating. The compliment caught me off guard. Thank you. This strong energy isn't always seen as something positive. People fear what they don't understand, he replied simply, or what makes them question their own choices. There was an unexpected depth to his words. It seems you speak from experience. Carlo gave a wistful smile. Let's just say my divorce taught me a lot about how people react when you don't meet their expectations. The conversation continued for another hour, delving into increasingly personal territory. When we finally parted, with the promise of another call the following week, I realized I'd shared more about my feelings and insecurities with this man I barely knew than I had with many people close to me. The next day, during lunch with Camila, I mentioned the video call. How was it? She asked, clearly curious. Surprisingly, good. I admitted, Carlo is interesting, cultured, thoughtful, and doesn't seem intimidated by the fact that I'm a cop. That's wonderful, Helena. Camila seemed genuinely happy for me. When's the next call? Next week. It's just a friendship, nothing more. He lives on the other side of the world, remember? Camila gave an enigmatic smile. Distance is just a logistical detail these days. What matters is the connection. You sound like one of your love-struck patients, I joked. And you sound like someone trying to convince themselves they're not interested, she retorted, perceptive as ever. Maybe she was right. Video calls with Carlo became a highlight of my weeks. We went from once a week to 2, then 3. We shared details of our daily lives, photographs of our cities, and songs we loved. He showed me the projects he was working on. I told him stories, the less disturbing ones, from my work as a police officer. On one of these calls, 2 months after our first conversation, Carlo surprised me with a question. "Helena, I'm thinking of visiting the United States in March. Daniel invited me to see their new house in Seattle. Would it be possible? Maybe? To meet in person?" My heart skipped an embarrassing beat. Sure, Seattle isn't that far from Portland. I could drive there in a weekend. His face lit up. Actually, I was thinking about maybe extending the trip and spending a few days in Portland too. If you don't mind showing me around. I'd love to, I replied, surprised by my own enthusiasm. After we hung up, I stared at the dark computer screen, trying to understand what was happening. Was I really developing feelings for someone I'd met in a disastrous marriage and only talked to online? My phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Sergeant Wilson, my direct superior, Peterson. "We need you at Central. We've had a development on the Riverfront case." The Riverfront case involved a series of sophisticated robberies at luxury condominiums along the river. We'd been investigating for weeks with little progress. "I'm on my way," I replied, the professional police officer taking control again. Work has always been my refuge. When everything else seemed uncertain or complicated, I could always rely on the clear structure of police duty, the unequivocal mission to protect and serve. But in the months following that conversation with Carlo, I began to notice a subtle shift within myself. Work was still important, even fundamental, but it wasn't everything anymore. For the first time in many years, there was something or someone competing for space in my thoughts. As March approached, I found myself doing things I wouldn't normally do, researching the best Portland restaurants to take him to, organizing my schedule to have a few days off during his visit, even buying a few new pieces of clothing more feminine than my usual wardrobe of jeans, t-shirts, and boots. "You're in love," Camila declared during one of our runs in the park. "I'm not in love," I protested, picking up the pace. "I'm interested. Curious. They're two different things." She murmured, unconvinced. "And that's why you rearranged your entire work schedule for March? And bought that dress you'd never normally wear?" I shot him an irritated look. "Speaking of March, will you be in town when Carlo comes? I'd like to introduce you." "Of course I will be," she smiled. I wouldn't miss the opportunity to meet the man who got Officer Helena Peterson to buy a red dress. The weeks passed quickly, filled with intense work, more conversations with Carlo, and, surprisingly, a few messages from Marco. After the wedding incident, the last name I expected to see on my phone was his, but there it was, a formal, almost professional message. "Helena, I hope you're okay. I'd like to apologize for my behavior at Daniel and Beatrice's wedding. It was inappropriate, disrespectful, and completely unjustifiable. I'm working on my issues with a therapist, and I've realized how much my behavior was conditioned by prejudices I didn't even recognize I had. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I recognize my mistake and I'm deeply sorry." I stared at the message for several minutes, unsure how to respond. On the one hand, he appreciated the initiative. On the other, I still vividly remembered his cruel words. After some reflection, I replied, "Marcos, thank you for the message. I appreciate your apology and acknowledgement of the issue. I also apologize for my physical reaction. It was unprofessional of me. I hope you're making progress with your therapist." It was brief, polite, and sincere. We didn't have to be friends, but we didn't have to be enemies either. His response came quickly. "Thank you for understanding. And as for the punch, I think I deserved it." That made me smile. Maybe there was hope for Marcos after all. Finally, March arrived. Carlo let me know when he landed in Seattle, and we spent the next few days exchanging messages while he visited Daniel and Beatrice. My sister called me after the first day. "He won't stop talking about you," she said, not even bothering to me first. "It's Helena," said this. "Helena likes that. Helena showed me this place in Portland. It's adorable and a little annoying at the same time." "Stop it," I replied, feeling my face heat up. "We're just friends." Sure. Friends who talk every day and who are clearly crazy about each other, even if neither of them admits it. After 3 days in Seattle, Carlo finally boarded the train to Portland. I offered to pick him up at the station, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness I hadn't experienced since I was a teenager. I waited on the platform, trying not to appear too anxious. When the train finally arrived and passengers began to disembark, I felt my heart race. And then, there he was, carrying an elegant suitcase and looking around for me. Our eyes met, and his face broke into a smile that stirred something inside me. I walked toward him, unsure of exactly how to greet him. A handshake? Too formal? A hug? Perhaps too invasive. Carlo solved the dilemma for me, leaning in to kiss each of my cheeks, European style. Helena, he said, his accent making my name sound more musical than it actually was. Finally, welcome to Portland, I replied, suddenly aware of every word and gesture. Was the trip good? Great. The train is comfortable and the scenery is ... How do you say breathtaking? Breathtaking, I translated, smiling. Come on. My car is parked across the street. On the way to the hotel where he was staying, we talked about Seattle, about Daniel and Beatrice. They seem very happy. About the weather in Portland, more rain than in Italy, but not as cold as I expected. It was strange and wonderful to have him there, physically present. After months of computer screens and text messages, he was real. The soft scent of his cologne, the way he gestured when he spoke, the way his face lit up when he smiled. I made dinner reservations, I commented as I drove. There's an Italian restaurant downtown that they say is quite authentic. But if you'd rather rest today, we can save it for tomorrow. No. Dinner sounds perfect. What about an Italian restaurant? He smiled. I'm curious to see what you Americans consider authentic Italian. I dropped him off at the hotel so he could rest and freshen up, arranging to meet him at the restaurant at 8. At home, I spent more time than I'd like to admit getting ready. I opted for the red dress Camila had mentioned, a simple yet elegant design, paired with a black blazer and ankle boot. My hair, normally tied back in a practical ponytail, was loose, falling in waves around my shoulders. When I entered the restaurant, Carlo was already there, chatting animatedly with the Mater D in Italian. Upon seeing me, he stopped mid-sentence, his eyes roving me up and down with such evident admiration that I felt my face heat up. You look bellissima, he said, getting up to pull out my chair. Thank you, I replied, nervously adjusting my hair. You look great too. Dinner was wonderful. The food was truly good. Not as bad as I feared, Carlo admitted with a smile. The wine was excellent, and the conversation flowed as easily as it had on our video calls. However, there was a new dimension now, the occasional brush of hands across the table, the glances that lingered a little longer than necessary, the growing awareness of something shifting between us. So, he asked, as we savored the tiramisu dessert, how has it been for you? After the ... wedding incident? I was surprised by the question. You mean, after I punched the groom's best friend? Carlo laughed. Exactly, I shrugged. Actually, it was liberating, in a way. Not that I recommend violence as a solution, of course, but that moment made me realize a few things about myself, about how I'd been allowing certain attitudes and comments to affect me, like this. I took a sip of wine, considering my answer. You know, as a female police officer, you get used to hearing certain comments, dealing with certain prejudices, about being too tough, too cold, too ... masculine. Over time, you start to wonder if there's any truth to it. If maybe you really are inadequate somehow. Carlo nodded, his gaze fixed on me, truly listening. When Marco said those things about me being alone because of my attitude, because I wasn't feminine enough, it was like he tapped into all my insecurities at once. I paused, surprised by my own honesty. But then, when things calmed down, I realized the problem wasn't me. It was his narrow view of what a woman should be. And you really believed that? That you could be alone because of your work? Because of your personality? I believed it, I admitted, for a while. But then I realized, if someone can't handle who I am, what I do, then they're not the right person for me. It's that simple. Carlos smiled, reaching out to touch my hand. Simple as that, and quite brave. The touch of his hand was warm, comforting. I smiled back, feeling something loosen inside me, a tension I didn't even know I was carrying. The next few days were a whirlwind. I showed Carlo Portland's landmarks, the Japanese gardens, Powell's books, the Saturday market, but also the places tourists don't normally see, my favorite coffee shops, a small jazz bar tucked away in the industrial district, the park where I ran every morning. On the third day, he accompanied me to the police station, where I made a quick stop to pick up some documents. I introduced him to some colleagues, including Wilson, who raised his eyebrows significantly when he saw us together. "So, what's it like dating an American police officer?" Wilson asked as he walked us out. Carlo looked momentarily confused, then smiled. "We, single quotes, as you say, still figuring things out. We're still getting to know each other," I clarified, shooting Wilson a warning look that he blithely ignored. "Well, if you need tips on how to deal with her, come to me," he said to Carlo with a "I've worked with Peterson for 7 years. I know all his secrets." "Don't listen to him," I told Carlo as we left. "Wilson thinks it's funny." "He seems to like you a lot," Carlo observed. "They all do, actually. It's different from the image you painted of yourself, the tough cop everyone fears." "Well, maybe I exaggerated a little," I admitted with a smile. "Or maybe they're behaving well because you're here." That night, I took Carlo to dinner at Camilla's house, where she had insisted on meeting him. It was a pleasant evening, full of laughter and stories. Carlo and Camilla hit it off instantly, talking about everything from Italian politics to psychology, which he had briefly studied in college before switching to architecture. As we were leaving, Camilla gave me a hug and whispered in my ear, "He's perfect for you. Don't let him get away." I didn't respond, but his words stayed with me on the drive back to Carlo's hotel. The week was coming to an end. In 2 days, he would return to Italy, and then, what? Would we resume video calls? Would we stay in touch until our mutual interest naturally waned with distance? Carlo also looked thoughtful as we walked side by side on the damp sidewalk. "A penny for your thoughts," I said, breaking the silence. He smiled. "I was thinking I don't want this week to end." "Neither do I." We stopped in front of the hotel, the moment charged with unspoken possibilities. "Would you like to come upstairs for a last drink?" he asked, his English more hesitant than usual. The question hung between us, its meaning deeper than mere words. "Yes," I replied simply. The hotel room was elegant and minimalist. Carlo opened a bottle of wine he'd purchased from a local winery, while I sat on the small sofa by the window admiring the city lights. "A toast," he said, handing me a glass. "To unexpected encounters." "To unexpected encounters," I repeated, clinking my glass to his. We chatted for a while about light topics, places he still wanted to see in the United States, my planned summer vacation, books we were reading. Then, gradually, a comfortable silence settled between us. Carlo sat next to me on the sofa, so close I could feel the warmth of his body. "Helena," he said finally, his gaze intense, "I need to say something. Before I return to Milan." My heart raced. "What?" "Since the wedding, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Weeks talking, these days together, have only confirmed what I already suspected. There's something special between us." "I feel that way too," I admitted, surprised at my own courage. "But the distance distance is a challenge, not an insurmountable obstacle," he replied, taking my hand. "If we both want it, we can make it work. We have video calls, messages, visits, double quotes, visits between Portland and Milan aren't exactly like visiting someone in the next neighborhood," I observed with a nervous smile. "True," he agreed, "but maybe it doesn't always have to be between Portland and Milan." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Carlo took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I've been thinking about expanding my practice, working internationally. Seattle has interesting architecture, constantly evolving, and Portland Portland has a certain police force that completely fascinates." My heart felt like it wanted to leap out of my chest. "Are you considering moving to the United States?" "I'm considering the possibility," he corrected gently. "Not tomorrow, not next month, but maybe, if what we have continues to grow, maybe in the future." It was a bold statement, frightening and wonderful all at once. "That's a big change to consider." "Yes," he agreed. "But some people are worth big changes." I looked at him, this man I'd known only a few months ago, who lived across the ocean, who spoke a different language than me, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the fragile, anxious hope of youth, but something more mature, more patient, more resilient. I leaned in and kissed him, softly at first, then with an intensity that surprised us both. His hands found my face, my hair, while mine traced the contours of his shoulders, his back. When we finally pulled apart, we were both panting. I guess that answers my unspoken question, he smiled, his hands still on my face. What question would that be? If you'd be willing to try, to take a chance on what we can be together, despite the distance, despite the complications. I smiled, feeling an unexpected certainty. I'm willing to try. The rest of the night was a discovery of bodies, of long-suppressed desires, of a connection that transcended words and distance. The next morning, I woke in Carlo's arms, feeling simultaneously vulnerable and protected, exposed and accepted. His last day in Portland flew by. We had coffee at a small French bakery, walked hand in hand through Waterfront Park, and took silly photos in front of the famous Keep Portland Weird sign. In the early evening, I drove him to the airport, where his flight to New York awaited, the first leg of his long journey back to Milan. At the terminal, in front of the boarding gate, we held hands, reluctant to say goodbye. I'll miss you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'll miss you too, I replied, surprised by the intensity of the feeling. But we'll talk tomorrow, okay? Certainly. And I'll start planning my next visit. Or maybe you could come to Milan for your summer vacation. I would love to visit your city. The final boarding announcement rang out over the PA system. Carlo pulled me into a tight hug, then a kiss that attempted to convey everything words couldn't. See you soon, Mia cara, he whispered. See you soon, I repeated, forcing a smile. I watched as he passed through security and disappeared down the aisle leading to the plane. Only then did I allow the tears to come, not of sadness, but of a complex emotion that mixed anticipated longing with profound happiness at having found someone like him. On the way home, my phone rang. It was Beatrice. So, how were the days with the most charming Italian in my husband's family? I laughed, wiping away the last of my tears. They were amazing, wonderful. I'm so happy for you, Helena. I knew you two would get along. How did you know? At the wedding we barely spoke. Sisterly intuition, she replied, and I could picture her smile on the other end of the line. Besides, I saw the way he looked at you during the reception, even before the incident. And how did he look at me? Like, you're the most fascinating woman in the room. Like you want to know every thought in your head. That's how Daniel looks at me sometimes. I felt a wave of affection from my sister. Thank you, Baya, for everything. For what exactly? For marrying Daniel, for inviting Carlo, for encouraging me to respond to his message, for always believing that I deserved more than I believed I did. There was a brief silence. When Beatrice spoke again, her voice was choked. You deserve all the happiness in the world, Helena. You always have. That night, lying in bed, I reflected on the journey of the past few months. The wedding, the fight, the punchy events that at the time seemed catastrophic, but which I now saw as catalysts for a necessary transformation. Sometimes you have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time to finally find your way. Sometimes you have to stand your ground, even if it means causing a scene, to get the right people to notice you. My phone vibrated with a text from Carlo. I miss you already. I can't wait to see where this journey takes us. I smiled into the phone, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. Me too, I replied. See you tomorrow. I put my phone on the nightstand and closed my eyes, letting sleep take over. Tomorrow would be another day. A day closer to my next meeting with Carlo. A day closer to discovering what we could be together. At my sister's wedding, when Marcos ordered me to move out of the way, I refused. I kept my place. And now, months later, I realized that my decision had changed everything. Not just because of the confrontation itself, but because of what it represented: my refusal to give ground, to be less than I was to accommodate someone else's insecurities. I fell asleep with a smile on my lip, imagining the possibilities the future could bring. Over the next few months, Carlo and I settled into a routine. Daily video calls, long text messages, occasional packages crossing the Atlantic, books in Italian he sent me to help me learn the language. Specialty coffee from Portland I sent him, small gifts that meant more for their thought than their material value. The distance was hard, I won't lie. There were nights when the longing was almost physical, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. There were times when I wondered if we were being realistic, if a long-distance relationship could really work in the long run. But then I remembered how I felt in his arms, how easy our conversations were, how completely accepted and valued I felt for who I was, not despite my strength, but because of it. At work, my colleagues noticed the change in me. Wilson was the first to comment in his usual direct way. "You look different, Peterson. More, light." Light? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I'm doing the same job as always. Chasing the same criminals." "It's not about the work," he insisted. "It's about you. Do you seem more, I don't know, at peace with yourself? Less defensive?" I reflected on this as we completed our rounds. Wilson wasn't wrong. There was something fundamentally different about the way I related to the world now. A new security that came not from my badge or my gun, but from knowing that it was possible to be exactly who I was and still be loved. In June, I used my 2-week vacation to visit Carlo in Milan. It was my first trip to Europe, and the mix of excitement and nerves nearly made me sick on the flight. What if the chemistry we'd felt in Portland was gone? What if, on his own turf, Carlo was different? What if his family didn't accept me? What if... All doubts were dispelled the moment I saw him waiting at the airport, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. Not the traditional roses, but something more personal, more meaningful. "Welcome to Milan, mia cara." He smiled, hugging me as if he never wanted to let me go. The 2 weeks in Milan were magical. Carlo showed me his city as only a native could, not just the must-see sights like the Duomo and the Last Supper, but also the small family-run restaurants in outlying neighborhoods, the flea markets where he hunted for pieces for his restoration projects, the little cafe where he wrote his reports on Sunday morning. I met his family-loving elderly, a younger sister with twins, aunts and uncles, and cousins who would show up for Sunday dinners with home-cooked meals and endless stories. My Italian was far from fluent, but it was improving every day, and Carlo's family showed me a patience and hospitality that touched me. "They loved you," Carlo commented the night after. Family dinner. We were in his apartment, a spacious loft in a restored old building, drinking wine on the small balcony that overlooked a plant-filled courtyard. "How can you know?" I could barely form complete sentences. "It's not what you say, but how you are," he replied simply. "My mother told me you have honest eyes. That, coming from her, is the highest compliment possible." I smiled, leaning against his chest as we watched the stars. "Your family is wonderful. I can see why you are the way you are." "And what do I look like?" he asked curiously. "Kind, considerate, strong, but not in an ostentatious way. Secure enough to admire strength in others rather than fear it." Carlo kissed the top of my head. "That's perhaps what fascinates me most about you, Helena. Your strength. Not just physical, but strength of character, of conviction." "This strength wasn't always seen as something positive," I commented, thinking about Marcos, about other men who had passed through my life. "Then they were fools," he replied simply, "and I am a lucky man that they did not recognize the treasure they let slip away." The day before I returned to Portland, Carlo took me to dinner at an elegant restaurant overlooking the Duomo. The place was clearly special soft lighting, well-spaced tables, an atmosphere of understated exclusivity. "Are we celebrating something?" I asked as a sommelier poured us a local red wine. "Maybe," Carlo replied with an enigmatic smile. "Or maybe I just want your last night in Milan to be unforgettable." Dinner was extraordinary, traditional northern, Italian dishes prepared with a modern twist. We talked about everything and nothing, deliberately avoiding the topic of my imminent departure. It was during dessert, a delicate panna cotta with red berries, that Carlo took my hand across the table, his gaze suddenly serious. "Helena, these weeks with you have been the happiest I've had in a long time." "For me too," I replied, feeling a tightness in my chest at the thought of the separation that awaited us. "I've been thinking a lot about the future." "About us?" He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "Remember when I mentioned the possibility of expanding my office to the United States?" I nodded, my heart racing. "Well, it wasn't just an abstract idea. I've been talking to some contacts in Seattle for the past few months. There's an architecture interested in a partnership." Carlo... I began, not knowing exactly what to say. am not asking you to leave Portland, your career, your life, he quickly clarified. Seattle isn't that far away. We could see each other on weekends, maybe alternating between the two cities. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be better than an ocean separating us. The prospect was both exciting and terrifying. Would you do that? Would you move to another country, leave your family, your office here? For you? Yes. His answer was simple, direct. Not right away. It would take a few months to get everything organized. But yes, I would do it. Carlo, I can't ask. You're not asking, he interrupted gently. I'm offering, because I love you, Helena, because I want to see where we can go together, and because I believe some challenges are worth facing. It was the first time he'd said those words. I love you. 3 simple syllables that changed everything. I felt tears in my eyes, something rare for me. I love you too, I replied, surprised at how easily the words came out, as if they had been waiting for the right moment. That night, in his apartment, we made love as if trying to imprint each other's bodies on our memory, knowing it would be months before we saw each other again. Afterward, lying side by side, we made plans. When he would come visit again in October perhaps, when I might return to Milan at Christmas, to experience the Italian winter, what our lives would be like when we were in the same time zone. These were hopeful, optimistic, perhaps even naive plans, but at that moment, they seemed not only possible, but inevitable. Returning to Portland was bittersweet. On the one hand, I missed my job, my friends, and the familiarity of my routine. On the other, every mile the plane traveled was another mile separating me from Carlo. Camilla picked me up at the airport, bombarding me with questions about the trip, Milan, and Carlo's family. I answered automatically, my mind still partially in Italy. Earth to Helena, she said, snapping her fingers in my face. You're on another planet entirely. Sorry, I smiled, shaking my head. I guess I'm still processing it. It must have been amazing to leave you so distracted. It was transformative, I admitted. And Carlo is considering moving to Seattle. Camila almost crashed the car. What? This is serious. Very serious. He has contacts there, opportunities. We could see each other often, not just 2 or 3 times a year. Wow. She was momentarily speechless. A rare occurrence. Wow, I know. And how do you feel about that? I thought for a moment. Scared, excited, grateful, incredulous, all at the same time. Sounds like love, she commented with a smile. It seems so, doesn't it? I laughed, feeling a lightness that belied the tiredness of the trip. Camila, I never thought I'd say this, but I think I've found someone who truly sees me, who values me for exactly who I am, not despite it. This is what I always said you deserved. She squeezed my hand briefly. I'm so happy, truly. The following months were an exercise in patience. Carlo and I maintained our routine of daily conversations, but now there was a more concrete purpose, a goal. His move to Seattle, tentatively scheduled for January of next year. There were obstacles, of course, work visas to apply for, contracts to negotiate, an apartment in Milan to rent or sell, the logistics of moving an entire life across an ocean. In September, a new challenge arose. I was offered a promotion to detective sergeant, a position I had coveted for years. It was an incredible opportunity, but it would mean more responsibilities, more unpredictable schedule, and less flexibility to visit Seattle on weekends. You have to accept it, Carlo insisted during our late-night video call. It's what you've always wanted, but it would complicate our plans, I argued. Newly promoted sergeants don't get time off easily. We'll make it work, he stated. Confidently, I might spend more time in Portland at first. I can work remotely part of the time. Are you sure? I don't want you to sacrifice your opportunities in Seattle. Carlos smiled. That smile that made my heart skip a beat, even through the computer screen. Helena, the important thing is that we're in the same country, in the same time zone. The rest are details we'll work out together. I accepted the promotion. The ceremony was small, just a brief event in the police station. Auditorium. Wilson was the first to greet me, followed by other colleagues. Camila was there taking photos that she immediately sent to Carlo, who responded with a photo of himself raising a glass of champagne in a toast. Despite it being morning in Milan, October came and went without Carlos's planned visit. A major project in his office required his constant presence. It was disappointing, but understandable. We were both building the future we wanted to share, and that sometimes meant sacrificing the present. In November, I received an unexpected call. It was Marcos. Helena? I hope I'm not bothering you. No, it's fine, I replied, genuinely surprised. We hadn't spoken since the apology messages months ago. How are you, Marcos? Well, thank you. Actually, I'm in Portland for work and, well, I wanted to invite you for coffee. To personally apologize for my behavior at the wedding, I hesitate, uncertain. I don't know if it's necessary, Marcos. I've already accepted your apology for the message, I know, but it would be important to me. Part of my process of, well, becoming a better person, There was a sincerity in his voice that didn't recall the arrogant Marcos from the wedding. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, okay? There's a coffee shop near the police station. I can meet you there tomorrow on my lunch break. The next day, when I walked into the coffee shop, I almost didn't recognize Marcos. Not because of any dramatic physical change, but because of his posture, his expression. The air of arrogance had disappeared, replaced by something more calm, mature. Helena, he smiled, standing to pull out a chair for me. Thank you for coming. I sat down, still weary. So, what brings you to Portland? A consulting project. I'm helping a local startup with their marketing strategy. We chatted about neutral topics for a few minutes. His job, my recent promotion, the rainy Oregon weather. Then Marcos took a sip of his coffee and took a deep breath. Helena, I want to apologize again for the way I acted at the wedding. It was unforgivable. As I said before, I accept your apology. We all have our bad moments. It wasn't just a bad moment, he admitted, his eyes fixed on the cup. It was the culmination of years of, well, being an arrogant, sexist jerk, to be blunt. His frankness took me by surprise. I appreciate your honesty. After that night, Daniel gave me an ultimatum. He said our friendship depended on me seeking professional help for my problems with strong women, as he put it. Marcos smiled slightly. It was a shock to hear that from my best friend. I imagined so. I started therapy, at first, just to please Daniel, to be honest. But over time, I realized how much of my identity was built around toxic, fragile masculinity. I watched him with genuine interest. Do people really change? I wanted to believe so. What did you discover about yourself? I asked. Marcos seemed to appreciate the question, that I grew up with a very narrow view of what it means to be a man. That many of my interactions with women were based on insecurity and fear of not being respected, of not being man enough, and that led you to try to put down women who seemed too strong. Exactly, he nodded. Women like you, who don't need male approval to feel complete, have always made me deeply uncomfortable. Not because there was anything wrong with you, but because you exposed the fragility of my own ego. It was a surprisingly lucid analysis. Your therapist seems very good, Marcos laughed. She's exceptional. And yes, I deliberately chose a female therapist. Part of the process, I took a sip of my coffee, reflecting. You know, it's weird. That night at the wedding was awful at the time, but it ended up triggering a lot of positive change. For me, for you, double, quotes, what do you mean, for you? He asked, genuinely curious. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. That night made me face some of my own insecurities about being a woman in a male-dominated field, about balancing strength and vulnerability. And indirectly, it led me to get to know someone very special. Carlo? Marcos asked, surprising me. Beatrice mentioned that you two are together now. Yes, we are. I couldn't help but smile. He's moving to Seattle in January. That's wonderful, Helena. Truly. And the most surprising thing was that he seemed sincere. You two seem to have a connection, even that short time into your marriage. Did you notice? Of course. I noticed how he looked at you during the ceremony, with admiration, respect. At the time it bothered me, to be honest. Now I understand why. We finished our coffees in a surprisingly pleasant conversation. As we said goodbye, Marcos extended his hand. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Helena. It means a lot. I squeezed his hand. We all deserve a second chance, Marcos. As I watched him leave the coffee shop, I reflected on how unpredictable life could be. The man whose words had wounded me so deeply now seemed genuinely remorseful and transformed. The incident I thought would ruin my relationship with my sister ended up strengthening our bond, and the night I considered a professional and personal disaster ended up leading me to the man who now planned to cross an ocean to be closer to me. Christmas arrived quickly, bringing with it my second trip to Milan. This time, the city was transformed, festive. Lights in the streets, Christmas markets in the squares, a thin layer of snow that made everything magically different from the summer I'd known. Carlo's family welcomed me as if I were already part of their family. His mother had learned a few English phrases specifically for me. His father insisted on serving me the best portioned dish, and his sister gave me a handmade scarf for Seattle winters. On Christmas Eve, after the traditional 7-course dinner, Carlo took me for a nighttime stroll through central Milan. Piazza del Duomo was stunning, with a huge illuminated Christmas tree and families strolling despite the cold. We stopped in front of the cathedral, its Gothic spires silhouetted against the sky. "Next Christmas, we'll be in Seattle together," Carlo commented, putting his arm around my waist. "Or maybe Portland. It feels like a dream," I replied, resting my head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I'm afraid to wake up." "It's not a dream," he assured me, turning me to face him. "It's our future, Helena, and it starts very soon." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. "Carlo, it's not what you think," he smiled, opening the box. Inside was a delicate silver ring with a single blue stone. "It's not a proposal." "Not yet. It's a promise." I stared at the ring, speechless. A promise that no matter what challenges we face in transition, we will face them together. A promise that this is just the beginning of our story. Tears I couldn't control streamed down my face as he slid the ring onto my finger. "It's perfect," I whispered. "It matches your eyes," he smiled, wiping my tears with his thumbs. "And it symbolizes the ocean that will no longer separate us." We kissed under the Christmas lights in the heart of Milan, surrounded by strangers hurrying past, oblivious to the moment that changed our lives forever. 2 weeks later, I returned to Portland with the ring on my finger and certainty in my heart. January passed in a whirlwind of preparations, Carlo shipping belongings to Seattle, me rearranging my schedule to free up a few days to help him move, the two of us exchanging constant messages about furniture, neighborhoods, practical details that, far from tedious, felt like exciting parts of our new life together. On January 28th, I drove to Seattle to meet him at the airport. The anxiety was different this time. It was no longer about what ifs, but about finally. When I saw him emerge from the arrivals gate, carrying only a carry-on bag, the rest would arrive in the following days, I felt my heart expand in my chest. It was no longer just my Italian boyfriend arriving for a visit. It was Carlo, the man I loved, arriving to stay. We ran toward each other like in one of those romantic movies I used to find cliché. He lifted me off the ground in a tight hug, spinning me in circles, oblivious to the curious stares of the other passengers. "Welcome to, America," I said when he finally set me down. "This time, for good. To stay," he repeated, his bright eyes fixed on mine. Finally, the following week, we divided our time between organizing his new apartment in Seattle and scouting trips to Portland. I officially introduced him to my parents, who instantly approved, showed him my apartment, which he studied with an architect's eye, suggesting small changes that would make it more welcoming, and took him to the police station to meet my closest colleagues. Wilson, as expected, didn't miss the opportunity to embarrass me. "So you're the famous Italian architect," he smiled, shaking Carlos's hand with exaggerated enthusiasm. "The man who achieved the impossible, making Helena Peterson wear a red dress." Carlo laughed, looking at me with a raised eyebrow. "Red dress? It's a long story," I replied, glaring at Wilson. "I have all the time in the world right now." Carlo smiled, wrapping his arm around my waist. And it was true. We had time to figure out how to make our relationship between two cities work. Time to learn each other's habits, to integrate our daily lives, to build a shared future. It wouldn't be perfect, nor would it be. There would be challenges, adjustments, moments of doubt and frustration, but we would face them together. As I drove back to Portland after dropping Carlo off at his new apartment in Seattle, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 9 months. From the humiliation and anger at Beatrice's wedding to the love and hope of this new beginning. The punch to Marcos, which at the time seemed like a disaster, ended up being the catalyst for a series of events that transformed my life. Not that I recommend violence as a solution, of course, but sometimes you have to defend your space, establish your boundaries, even if it means causing a scene. Get out of the way, Marcos had ordered that night. I didn't leave, and because of that I discovered not only my own strength, but also a man who admired that strength, who celebrated it instead of fearing it. I touched the promise ring on my finger, feeling a deep gratitude for life and its unexpected twists and turns. For Beatrice and her marriage, which brought together people from different worlds, for Carlo and his courage to cross an ocean in the name of love, even for Marcos and his involuntary role in the story, and most of all, for myself, for standing my ground when it would have been easier to give in, for staying true to who I was, even when it meant being alone for a while. Because in the end, it wasn't by being less, but by being exactly who I was, that I found the kind of love I always deserved. A love that began with a fight, a punch, and chaos at a wedding bar. And now, 9 months later, it opened the doors to a future I barely dared to dream of. A future where I didn't have to choose between strength and vulnerability, between career and love, between being respected and being loved. A future where I could simply be Helena, police officer, woman, lover, friend, complete in all my complexities and contradictions. And that, I realized as I crossed the bridge back to Portland, was perhaps the greatest victory of all.